All right, the YouTube stream is up and going. You're good to go, Brian.
Okay, thanks. So I want to welcome everybody to the December 19th, 2024 final meeting for the year of the St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee. We begin this gathering by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaty. It is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering places home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous peoples. We've got a new little section on today's agenda, which is the chair's message. There's just a couple of things that I wanted to address there. The first of which, if any of you are not aware, that Councillor Carlos Garcia has passed away just a few days after his birthday at the age of 79. Carlos is certainly going to be a loss to the city, to city council, and to the different, volunteer committees that he had an interest in and took part in. I guess I've known Carlos for the better part of 20 years at least. I first got to know him. We sat on the Niagara Regional Heritage Committee, which, believe it or not, the Niagara region did have their own heritage committee many, many years ago. And Carlos, had a great interest in that, and certainly with the heritage of St. Catharines, particularly Port Dalhousie, and I'm sure his passing will be felt by many people. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we've had a resignation off the Heritage Committee. Gail Benjafield has resigned, which is unfortunate because Gail's been on the committee for many years, probably about 12 years or so anyway. And she certainly knew her local history, and she was a valuable asset to the committee, but she decided to step away for various reasons. So we thank Gail for the service that she gave to this committee, and just to let her know that she will be missed. So that's, I think, all that I had to say for the chair's message. Moving on, do we have any additions or deletions to be made to the agenda? Nothing.
Just to say that the item for 1 Pelham Street, we've deferred that to January at least.
Right.
So that's not on there. And then also designation subcommittee, we didn't have a meeting this month, and so there'll be no update on that this month.
I just wanted to maybe add one thing in right at the end, and that would be more for like information and correspondence. It's just kind of a fun little update, something that I actually just found out yesterday. So we can tack that in at the end. It's about a house in Port Dalhousie. So that said, can I have a motion to approve the agenda for today? I saw Maria's hand go up first. Thank you, Maria. And all in favor? Okay, done. Motion to adopt the minutes of the previous meeting from November the 28th. Are there questions, comments, or changes to be made to the minutes?
Brian, there are a few typos that we need to get fixed.
Okay.
Rectified.
Okay. Do you have a list of them, or are they too numerous to take up our time with right now?
They're fairly numerous. Would you like me to just edit the document or highlight it in the document and send it to Lauren, or how do you want me to handle it?
I don't see why we couldn't have you just itemize them in an email and send them to Lauren.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll do that. No problem.
Yeah, Maria?
Yes, thank you. I was absent from the November meeting, unfortunately. My apologies, but I note on the minutes that I'm named as approving the agenda, and that's just an oversight, I suppose, on someone's part, but I wasn't at that meeting. So that
Okay.
I'm not sure who did approve.
I'll go back to the video. Anna, who is our student, she's moved on now, but I can go back and take a look, and I'll
Okay.
update that name.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I know I wasn't there.
Okay. And
Yeah, I'll make sure that's correct.
I have
Thanks.
a question too. We used to note absences. Just Maria reminded me when she said she wasn't here. We used to note absences on the minutes. Is that something new that we've changed?
That's a good question. I can go and ask clerks if that's appropriate. I know we've gotten some feedback too on like including voting record, and we're going to make that change as well. So we're going to remove voting record. I'll ask them if they want us to note absences as well, and we can make those changes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think the rationale was that, if you had missed so many meetings, it might become an issue. I think that was one of the
Oh,
reasons why it
that
was
makes sense.
maybe included, but I know I'm used to seeing it, so I maybe wonder.
Yeah, and wasn't it something like if you missed 3 meetings in a row or something, we'd start questioning,
Yes.
like, why weren't you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess we should maybe then have a motion to adopt the amended minutes, and then we can just make the changes after they're sent to Lauren. So could I have a
I'll
motion
make that motion.
Okay, Lorraine, thank you. And all in favor? Okay, done. Declarations of interest. Do we have any to be made today?
I do. I briefly worked on the application for 33 Lock Street, and so for that, I'll be turning off my my video and my speaker, and I will be participating in that conversation.
Okay, thanks. So moving on to item 8.1, 125 Main Street, which is alterations to the house in the Port Dalhousie HCD. And Thomas Robertson, I believe you're here to razzle dazzle us.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I'm available for any questions regarding the plans. I guess to give a quick summary, I have a shed in the backyard, and I would like to remove the shed and build a new attached shed at the side of the house to make more room in my backyard. And to obviously the shed that's there has some issues to it. There's some raccoons in it. There's some structural issues. It's settling. It's leaning towards one side. It's kind of hard to tell in the picture, but I think a new one will definitely serve me well. So yeah, aside from the shed, no other changes to the house. There is a chimney in the corner that was just not drawn. It's staying. The front is staying, and the siding will match the house. So
Okay. So that's your presentation then?
yeah, it's pretty minor. There's also work in the backyard. I'm not sure if you guys have to review the backyard work. Like it's just a deck and a covered portion of the deck also. That's not visible from Main Street. So the only part visible from Main Street would just be the garage doors and like the roof line, which you see in the picture there.
Okay. Do you have questions about the proposed alterations and and the demolition of the garage as well? of the original one. Rachel.
Thanks. Sorry, I had difficulty finding the unmute button. I was just curious about if you have any idea about when this shed was built. Is it contemporary to the house? It looks like the roofing material at least looks new as far as I can tell. But I'm just
Yeah.
curious
So
if you had any idea.
So I purchased the house last year. So I wouldn't know. I mean, just by looking in it, it's probably like the wood's pretty old. Like I would say it's probably like 50s or 60s. Like I don't think it was part of the original house. I know the house is 1920s. I think it was likely added after, but I can't say for sure unless you looked at satellite images, maybe.
Thank you.
Maria.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps I missed it when I was looking at the submission that was sent to us, but and I think you referred to it now, but are you going to be building a new back deck and a new shed at the side and a garage?
No. So I'm getting rid of this garage and I'm replacing it with just the attached shed. So this here has never really been large enough to park a car in. So
Oh, I see.
I'm not really losing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like the structure that's there currently is like about 12 feet by like 18 maybe. And I'm replacing it with, I believe, just under 8 feet by 14. So I'm going smaller actually.
As a shed / garage?
Yeah, I didn't know what to refer to it, so I'm
Uh-huh.
applying as the owner. So it's too small to be a garage, so I wasn't sure what
Right.
to call it, right? So
Okay.
the basically the goal of this project is to utilize the backyard space and the view of Martindale Pond. So
Right.
that's a large portion of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Lorraine.
Hi, just a quick question. Probably has nothing to do with what we can see from the front, but I noticed some kind of notation on the railing. Are you changing the spacing of the railing for new government aspects or new government rules, or what's happening with that? You can see there it says
Oh,
new
yeah. So
guards.
that's just noting that there's going to be a guard up on top. And we're going to build it like to the latest building code. This is just like a preliminary drawing. So I was just showing the city that we're going to follow the latest codes with regards to railings.
Okay, so a guard in addition, so the railing stays the same and a guard is added?
Yeah, so right now this area at the back
Mhm.
isn't there. So that this is all part of the project at the back. So the covered area,
Mhm.
that's all new. Aside from the door. So on the back, the doors and windows are already there. There's like a Juliet balcony off of the back, and we're just extending it over to make it a
And
more usable patio space.
so you're saying that that can't be seen from the front?
No, because the way I've designed it is I've made the roof pitch extend as the railing. So on the front, there won't be a railing. There'll be a wall where the shingles line up and give you that height that you need as a guard. And then only on the sides where there's a fall hazard, there would there be a railing. So from the front, you'll just see the roof line, but really in the back, that roof line will act as the railing sort of in guard.
So the roof line from the front doesn't change?
No, just the new structure. Yeah, the new the actual house itself is staying entirely as is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Bergen.
Overall, it looks good to me. It doesn't really affect the streetscape or the feeling from the street very much at all. And I think it's a good improvement, so I kind of like it.
Thank you.
The only question I had was, is there going to be any kind of access from this shed or garage, whatever you call it, directly into the house? Like, is there going to be any door opening cut into the structure, or is it just tacked on to the side of the wall with no access from inside the house?
Yeah, so it's just going to be outdoor storage. So unfortunately, it's not big enough to really make access to the house worth it.
Okay.
By the time I'm probably gonna do shelving and storage in there. So it's going to be a pretty tight space. So I don't think there's going to be that option.
So if it ever had to be demolished, it would have zero impact on the original structure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not gonna, it's gonna be entirely self-sufficient for as in terms of the structural capacity, it's gonna kind of just be a lean-to to the house. So
Okay. Mark.
Yeah, thanks. It looks to me like it's a side and rear addition. Is that kind of what you're looking at?
yeah, so I wasn't sure what to classify it as because the addition in the backyard is really like a deck. It's a concrete deck, and half of the concrete deck is covered. So when I apply for the city permit, I'll have to talk to them about which exact permits I need to get.
Right. So in the backyard, I see that there's a stairway, like a few steps to walk up.
Yeah,
In
so
the
that's
rear, are you going to have access to the house as well, or is it completely even in the rear addition too?
so the deck will be I think it's 2 feet, just under 2 feet above the yard grade. So there'll be a couple steps to get down to the grass in the backyard. That's the reason for those steps.
And there's a side access to that from the or rear access to inside of it, or
Yeah, so there's an existing double door that goes out into a wooden deck that I currently have.
right?
And the wooden deck is kind of beyond its life. So as part of this project, I was looking to do kind of a permanent concrete structure that will require a little maintenance going forward.
Okay, so you'd have to enter out enter out the garden doors to get into this rear section, not from the inside as well.
Yeah, so the double doors go into the house, so that'll be the access onto the deck. And then there's also going to be 4 feet at the side of the new garage to allow access into the backyard.
Right, and there's no access into the rear and side addition from the house.
He's thinking that this is proud with here, with that setback. These doors are on this plane, not this plane.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so yeah, there is a sorry, who is the lady from the city again? What was her name? Oh shoot.
Lauren, is this the
sorry,
render you want?
Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
render
right
of
here.
the backyard. Do you have the render of the backyard? I sent
This one here?
Yeah, so this
Yeah.
will give them a good idea. So
Yeah.
it's
Okay,
actually the stairs sit way out. Sorry, I think this kind of helps the confusion.
yeah, I saw that this was on the edge. It looked like the window at the side of the door, the right side of the door, was at the end of the
Oh, I
concrete
see.
patio.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so no, the house is not being extended. It's just
I
an additional patio space, and then
I
on the
see.
side,
Yeah,
I have
I
a
see it from this
wall.
angle now.
Yeah, the wall is just a privacy wall because I have my neighbor's house is actually extending quite a bit further back than mine.
Right.
So it's just for some privacy in the patio space. So
Okay. Yeah, thanks for clearing that up.
yeah, sorry about that.
Andrew.
I guess the one question I had, if we can see the front image again, Lauren, is when it comes to additions, the recommendations in the Port Dalhousie district guidelines say that additions should be, from a design perspective, should differentiate between the old and the new. And from this image, which I understand may not be entirely comprehensive, it looks like it very much blends into. It could be mistaken for original. I'm just wondering if there's something I'm missing that is being done to offset it, so it creates that it avoids duplicating the style of the house, or if that's something you've sort of thought of.
Well, I would like to keep the style because I like the style of the home. It's not a heritage home. It's just in the heritage district. So I don't know if does that apply? I'm not entirely sure. But if like as the homeowner, I'd like it to look like the rest of the house.
also, if I may, through the chair, I think just from my perspective, because this style of like garage door and because the style of like of shed or garage attached would not have been common when the house was built. Like I see it as being kind of legible in that way. Whereas if like yes, it's going to blend in with the style, but like if you're aware of the history of this architectural style, you'll be like, okay, well that's obviously an addition, or it isn't consistent with what it would have this style of building would have normally had, and so that assumption would be built into it. But yeah, the style of it does blend, and maybe people who are not aware of that would be less it would be less legible too.
Oh,
So
okay.
you feel like this, by virtue of what you're saying, it is really offset inherently by not fitting in with.
I think that's one through the chair. I think that's one interpretation. Yeah, I think that's what would be mine anyway. But
And in a worst case scenario, you could maybe put a little date plaque or something on the inside of it saying, erected AD, 2025 or something. So that way there'd be absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind that it's a new construction.
Yeah, like that's possible. Yeah, it's the other thing is it's gonna be very difficult to get an exact match on the siding too, because it is the house is metal siding, so really I don't know how much, like I don't know when that was done, obviously previous to me, like probably in the 80s. So
Sorry, did you say metal siding?
yeah, like unfortunately the previous owner
Yeah.
at one point in time did metal siding, probably in the 70s or 80s. So that it really doesn't have that original look anyways, unfortunately. So I mean I would like to leave it the way I've drawn it if I can.
That does make a difference to me. I was sure if that was metal siding or what it was, but if it's metal siding, then it's self-evident that it's the new feature that's blending them together rather than anything else.
Yeah.
It does help, and I understand what you're saying.
I don't think there's not many people out there that are doing metal siding these days. So I can try to get a match, but it's probably not going to be exact. So
Mark, did you have a question or comment? I thought I saw your hand go up.
It may have. I think it was answered.
Okay.
Oh, I do remember. Yes, I do think that it's different enough with the arched like carriage house doors. It wouldn't have been common on, especially on the side of a house like that. Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Lauren?
Right. Through the chair, if you're interested in, because we're going to be putting together a motion, if you're interested in putting anything in there about legibility or the siding being slightly different or anything like that, then just let me know and I can put that in the motion. Yeah.
That's not necessary for me. I was more asking, but I understand and agree with both what you and Mark are saying. I'm comfortable if everyone else is.
Okay, so if there's no further questions or comments, then I guess we should have a motion to recommend approval of the proposed alterations to 125 Main. Unless members want to make some amendment to the motion. Robert.
I'd be happy to make the motion, approve that.
Very good. Thank you, Robert.
My pleasure.
So all in favor? Looks like it's done.
All right.
we appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you. I'll be in touch tomorrow to talk to you about next steps for your heritage permit. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 8.2, which is 33 Locke Street. That's for the proposed demolition of 33 Locke. And I see we have our presenters here. Bruce Hall, you want to take the floor. Razzle dazzle us.
Well, I'll try to razzle you. Dazzle is up to you. Thank you. My name is Bruce Hall, and I'm a principal with the Planning Partnership. And we're the land use planners on this application. And I have with me, Maria Godova from our staff, and our heritage consultant, Natalie DeRoche, and she'll speak for part of the presentation, as well as Joseph Veloce, who is the owner and will be the builder developer. So if you could move it to the next slide, please. This is just a quick overview of our presentation. We have a lot of slides, but we're going to move through them pretty quickly. I'm happy to answer questions along the way, or if you want to wait till the end, that might be a bit easier. So I'm going to just let Joseph just make a few quick remarks to introduce himself and his firm, and then I'll go through the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Bruce. So I guess first off, thanks to everyone for being here today, taking the time to hear about our proposal. I just wanted to take hopefully a quick minute, introduce myself. Together with myself, my wife and I own Veloce Homes. We're a family-run business. We really like to focus on, boutique projects like what we're proposing before you today, in really great infill settings. We've completed some similar projects like this in similarly sensitive areas. So we understand a project like this is about collaboration. We want to be able to build homes that enhance and contribute to the character of the area and its residents. In this particular case, both Lisa and I do have a local connection to the area. I grew up in Niagara, so I'm very familiar, spent countless weekends at the carousel at Lakeside Park. Lisa actually lived in Port Dalhousie for a number of years. She rode with the St. Catharines rowing club. Very fond memories of Henley. So I guess my point in saying that is we have an appreciation for what makes Port Dalhousie unique, the strong sense of community. And I think that's why we were drawn to this project in the first place. Definitely understand the sensitivity, the sensitive character of the area. So from the beginning of the process, we took some time, obviously engaging with professionals like Bruce, like Nathalie, who have extensive experience working specifically with heritage areas. We also took time to engage with local leaders early, and we developed a design that we think will positively contribute to the local character. And obviously, as we continue to work through the process, we are happy to continue to work collaboratively. We still have to refine, items like the materiality of the building. We're happy to have those discussions and work through the finer details as we progress. With that, I think I'll let Bruce take over and give you more context about what we've proposed.
Thank you, Joseph. If you could advance 2 slides, there was a slide about the company, but I think he's gone through it. This is a project that they did in Ancaster in the downtown historic area. Next slide, please. So in terms of the vision for 33 Locke Street, it's a contemporary 4-story residential building at a very prominent corner within the community, which will feature a range of unit types and sizes for different sizes of units and numbers of bedrooms, etc. It does have commercial uses that will activate the building at grade along Main Street, which is a good bookend to the commercial core area across the street. And the parking has all been relegated to the rear and is essentially below grade, given the change in grade as you move up Main Street. It's a strong design that utilizes very massing materials compatible with the heritage character. And as Joseph said, this can be further worked out through the site plan process. And we're happy to collaborate further with the committee on something that is sensitive. And it's a modest and gentle form of intensification, and we find it's an appropriate transition between the residential areas within the HCD and the commercial core areas. Next slide, please. Just a very quick snapshot. We've been at this for a while, did a lot of early pre-consultation, as Joseph said, with the people in the heritage community and councilors. Since we've been deemed complete, what we wanted to do was bring this application forward to the committee. In collaboration with planning staff, it was agreed that it's best that the heritage permit and the demolition permit and the planning applications all come before council at the same time. Staff is trying to adhere to the Planning Act timelines, and that would put this around March. So that's why we've come forward very soon on this. Next slide, please. In terms of neighborhood context, we're obviously in the Port Dalhousie community, which really contains a very diverse mix of uses and built forms. And the residential uses within the neighborhood residential area and the HCD include a variety of built forms and a range of, from single detached housing up to small and mid-sized apartment buildings. Some of the more recent development outside of the neighborhood area in the commercial core along Lake Park Street, including the Legion building, are much taller and denser. There are, however, many smaller infill apartment buildings in the residential area within the HCD, both on the edge and the interior along Main Street and along Dalhousie Street, with heights around 1 to 3 stories in height. There are a few exceptions to this, with some buildings taller, including the one at 10 Dalhousie. Next slide, please. Within the immediate block context, there are low-rise residential neighborhoods to the north and west. The commercial core areas to the south across Main Street. There are residential buildings on the east side of Locke Street, which back on to Lakeside Park, and some residential and mixed buildings located further to the west along Main Street. The colors here distinguish the different land use designations between low-density residential, medium-density residential, which includes the subject site, and commercial on the south side of Main Street. Next slide, please. In terms of the site itself in the immediate block, the existing building, which many of you are probably familiar with, given its corner location, which is set back behind a retaining wall, is an existing 2-story multi-unit residential apartment building with 8 rental units. It's clad with vinyl siding, asphalt shingles, vinyl windows and doors, and our heritage consultant, Natalie, will walk you through the specifics in more detail, including background of the number of renovations that have taken place to the building over the years. Next slide, please. This is just a site layout showing the location of the building on the site and the footprint. There are going to be 26 units with 1 and 2 bedrooms. Includes about 800 or 900 square feet of commercial space at grade, fronting onto Main Street. 26 parking spaces inside. There is no surface parking which exists today. It will be removed and replaced. There is bike parking inside the building for sustainability. There's about 2,000 square feet of common amenity indoors and out. And the density of it, notwithstanding the use of units per hectare figure, is about 2.2 FSI, which is modest. Next slide, please. This provides some views of the proposal and showing the varied massing and material, which is conceptual right now, but the palette does make it quite distinct and distinguishable from the heritage context, and yet we believe it's compatible. The base building materials, stone, capture the spirit of the existing retaining wall, and yet the active uses along that frontage on Main Street will help contribute to the vitality of the commercial core in the downtown and provide eyes on the street. And similarly, as you move, as shown in the bottom right, up Locke Street, you see that it's more residential in character with doors to the street, which is compatible with the residential nature as you move out of the core up into the neighborhood. Next slide, please. These are the elevations, and on the left is, notwithstanding that it says Locke Street, it's the Main Street frontage. And you can see the parking garage on the lower left is recessed, and so all parking is hidden from view, and all parking and bicycle access, permanent bicycle parking access, goes in through that door. And then on the right, the elevation going up Lock Street, you can see how it takes advantage of the natural grade and provides for residential doors and eyes on the street. Next slide, please. In terms of landscaping elements, there's enhanced landscaping that will happen. Approximately just under 40% of the site is dedicated to provision of open space around the 4 perimeters of the property, and this include new trees along Lock Street. There is not a lot of, existing vegetation, mature vegetation on Lock Street. Perennials and planting around the perimeter of the property, and enhanced paving materials where there are pedestrian areas. Next slide, please. In terms of the city's official plan, provides direction to manage future growth. It focuses mostly on land use and physical development, but considers all matters related to these variety of things around health, the social, economic, cultural, natural, and built environments, and the health of the community. And the plan's principles and policies are implemented through integrated decision-making, considering all applicable matters in every planning process and decision. That's why we think it's important to have the recommendation of your committee go forward to council at the same time with recommendations of staff on the rezoning to consider this in a comprehensive way. Next slide, please. The OP promotes a variety of objectives and priorities which we have considered and which drive both development and historic preservation, sustainability, growth management, housing, and employment. Next slide, please. The city's growth management strategy cannot be overlooked. It has to be considered in considering why it's appropriate to intensify within all through the community, but particularly in this area. Majority of growth planned for the city is to be accommodated within the urban area. Niagara region and the city of St. Catharines have a very aggressive, ambitious minimum intensification target of 95%, 95% of all growth allocated, which is at the time of this thing, 18,780 new units for the city of St. Catharines, and 95% of that must occur through intensification. Intensification is permitted, in certain nodes, promoted in certain nodes in terms of the urban growth center and the downtown, but also the city wants to see it spread out throughout the municipality in both the residential and mixed use designations. And it's particularly important in some of these areas which have greater sensitivities to look for good middle density, medium density development. Next slide, please. In terms of the existing land use designation, it's within the urban area. It's designated generally neighborhood residential, but it has within the North Plan District a medium density residential designation. And this designation permits all types of residential uses and ancillary uses, including small scale commercial at a density between 25 and 99 units per hectare and building heights not exceeding 20 meters. Next slide, please. The plan provides for increases in density between medium density and high density areas and allows for these changes through rezoning. And there's some criteria that the city looks to, the OP looks to in terms of locations should be on arterial collector roads, both of which Main Street and Lock Street must be walkable and proximate to services and have access to transit, which the site does, and located close to other medium density, high density residential designated sites. And you'll see, it's hard to see a little bit, but the subject site is sort of a brown taupe color. Excuse me. And there are other sites immediately adjacent, which have the same land use designation and of course, higher density commercial designations across the street. And any proposal for a change must be evaluated against the urban design principles and policies in the OP. Next slide, please. So the OP supports achieving very good urban design, and it's a key to creating sustainable livable communities, including creating a strong sense of identity, conservation of heritage, compatibility of new development, compact walkable communities that provide a range of housing and transportation, excuse me, and context sensitive design, including creating vibrant streetscapes in a public realm. And in terms of context sensitive design, the OP looks to create integrated compatible building in terms of its built form and massing, height, setbacks, etc., to minimize its impact on adjacent properties, to have parking that does not, I apologize, I'm getting over a cold, does not dominate the site, and preservation, conservation, enhancement, integration of cultural heritage facilities. Next slide, please. The OP is also highly supportive of the city's cultural heritage, supports continuing use, reuse, care, and conservation of heritage resources. Development shall have regard for identified cultural heritage resources and incorporate these where possible. Cultural heritage impact assessments are required to ensure that development does not adversely affect cultural heritage resources. And within the HCD, it is the overall intent to conserve and enhance its unique heritage character. And all new development must be subject to the city's urban design guidelines. Excuse me, apologize. There are criteria for new construction demolition within the city's OP, and heritage buildings shall be protected from any adverse effects of change. The original building fabric should be retained wherever possible, but new construction or infilling is not specifically precluded, but it should be compatible with the surrounding buildings and streetscape. And new construction is to be considered on an individual basis with the premise that buildings and architecture that are distinct and contemporary can be more appropriate. Next slide, please. I'm almost finished. In terms of the Port Dalhousie Heritage Conservation District and guidelines, they do provide clear direction and guidance around protection of the area's natural character, heritage character. They are guidelines. They're not intended to be necessarily prescriptive and do not expressly prohibit demolition, but they do provide criteria for dealing with it. These guidelines have been in place since about 2001. There has been change, in the area and within the planning frameworks that has evolved considerably, and the guidelines acknowledge that there will be situations that will arise in future years that were not anticipated. And we're seeing a lot of that in terms of the growth that the city and the region have to contend with. And the overall intent is to guide and manage future change. And again, that the overall character of the district is not detrimentally affected. Next slide, please. The HCD does contemplate new construction and provides direction. It should be compatible. New structures should avoid replication. They should appear to be new and not pretend to be historical. We just heard some discussion about the previous application, how that's very important to the committee. I think this development does a good job with this. And in terms of factors involving the visual and physical relationships between new buildings and old needs to be carefully considered. Next slide, please. So in the end, as noted earlier, there is a need in making decisions around new development to balance the municipal priorities and objectives, which is interpreted by the policy in other directions. The HCD and the heritage guidelines provide general policies around cultural heritage, the HC districts and the HIAs. They encourage residents and property owners to work with existing buildings and adapt them rather than demolish, while not expressly prohibited demolition of existing heritage structures and creation of new ones is discouraged, but there is criteria for new development. And again, where they do provide direction for consideration of new development with the overall goal to ensure that it'll be compatible with the heritage character. On the other hand, the planning and policy direction has to deal with aggressive minimum intensification targets imposed from the province, but also adopted by the region and the municipality at higher levels. It looks to provide a wide range of housing through the efficient use of land with higher density. They direct development around heritage to ensure that it's compatible, it's context-sensitive design, and the character of the heritage is not negatively impacted. Council needs to make decisions based upon a wide and diverse range of policy directions and considerations. It's not easy to balance these things. And the OP must be read in its entirety, and they have to take all this into consideration in every decision that they have to make. I'm going to hand it over to Natalie. I appreciate you bearing with me while I'm losing my voice. Hopefully Natalie can take it away and really focus on the matters that are very important to you and close to your hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. As was presented before, my name is Nathalie Desrosiers. I'm the Senior Heritage Lead at McCallum-Sater. Last year, McCallum-Sater was retained by Veloce Homes to prepare a cultural heritage impact assessment to evaluate the potential impact of the proposed development to the property, but also to the surrounding properties and the Port Dalhousie Heritage Conservation District as well. The primary focus of the cultural impact assessment is essentially to determine whether any cultural heritage resources might be adversely affected by the proposed development. And also, it's not only the property itself, but really our intention was to look at what would be the impact of the proposed development to the surrounding, including all the properties or urban fabric that is around the property. Next slide, first slide. No, I'm still on heritage status, sorry. So the property, as we know, is located within the Port Dalhousie Heritage Conservation District. The building itself is not individually designated under the bylaw, nor it is included in the St. Catharines Register of Non-Designated Cultural Heritage Resources. From the historical records from the Port Dalhousie Heritage Resource Inventory that was published in 1998, it indicated that 33 Lock dates back to approximately 1860, the first structure. According to the section 4.2 of the Port Dalhousie Heritage Conservation Guidelines, which define heritage building as those constructed before 1950, the property itself was recognized as a contributing building within the HLE only due to its construction date, and there were no other elements. So following our evaluation and based on primary sources, the heritage evaluation conducted by McCallum in November 2023, we did concluded that 33 Lock Street does not meet the criteria outlined in the Ontario Regulation 906 for determining cultural heritage value or interests. Also, the property does not qualify for individual designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act as well. Also, the property is not directly adjacent to any designated, listed, or inventory heritage property under the Ontario Heritage Act. So in terms of the heritage values, so regarding the heritage value of the property, the building is inspired by neoclassical features, but the building has undergone through multiple alterations over the years. We're talking about the roof line, we're talking about the materiality, the fenestration, the very configuration of the building itself. The building basically does not look anything like it was in 1860. In fact, it's a very strong interpretation of modern take on a heritage building. And the building has gone through so much that its interior have been completely modified. In heritage, we consider a building of heritage value that would be maybe under 50 or 60%, where there is a level of integrity. In this case, probably more than 75%, if not 80% of the building is nothing to do with the heritage building itself, the original building, 1860. So consequently, integrating the structure into any future project and trying to align it with the city growth objective would be very difficult. And also from a heritage point of view, when we look at a heritage building, we are always looking at what is the story of the building? What does the building tells us about what it was, let's say, just in 1860? And as of now, the building does not convey those heritage value or stories that was once or the reality of this building, but as of now, the building doesn't tell those stories. Therefore, for us, we consider that the proposed conservation strategy and approach, we're looking at a project that would enhance the property's contribution, meaning the land, the location, to the urban landscape, and of course, that would improve the character of the heritage district. Next slide, please. So in terms of the rationale for redevelopment, so once we have assessed the heritage value, what we have as of now, if there was a consideration of removing the property, we did recommend that it should be done in a manner that would allow for contemporary architectural and urban interpretation. But very important, while preserving the property's residential use and making sure that any future integration into the heritage area would be maintained, but also the building should convey some of the heritage values that were once there, way before all the modification. Therefore, the redevelopment of the property is recommended as it plays a significant role in the heritage streetscape along Long Street and Main Street and within the Port Dalhousie Heritage Conservation District. As presented, we have come to the conclusion that the design does reflect the district evolving urban fabric by incorporating those heritage inspired elements that Bruce mentioned. And also it does support a contemporary functionality. I guess the idea is to say, what should we do with this piece of land to make it relevant, not only for the HCD, but also to make it relevant for the commercial area and the new development that are in the area or coming in the area. We think that this approach would ensure that there will be a contextual integration, but also it would align with the heritage conservation goals and support a compatible growth within the district. Because growth is a fact. Every single project we work on, we see it everywhere where the heritage building are being either squeezed in the environment. And how do we make a property, an area relevant within the heritage context? Also, the proposed development will ensure a visual harmony with the neighboring properties that would create a much more cohesive and attractive streetscape, in fact. Also, the redevelopment does offer the opportunity to introduce a new structure that in fact would better align with the form, scale, and character, not only of the HCD, but also reflect the rhythm and the architectural eclecticism that we see in the surrounding the streetscape. Because an HCD does not have a specific line in the landscape. We need to have some sort of a transition between what is an HCD. An HCD is not only a line on a plan, It's how do we create an element that will offer a heritage area transition to a more developed area. So this is this aspect that we are looking at when we're talking about integrating an heritage area or a former heritage building. Next slide, please. So in this transitional role of the new development, we also see that the proposed development will act as precisely this transitional building. There are not that many buildings in this area that would act like that. In fact, that would probably be the first of its kind that will definitely bring the old and the new where the two would converge together, allowing this form of buffer zone, which in fact should be something maybe that might be considered another aspect along the HCD. And the new structure will also be a link in the landscape, a visual link in the landscape in order to connect what was once maybe the Heritage District, but also link it to what's coming and the new developments that are coming and all the buildings that we see from an architectural point of view that are in the commercial area, for example. We believe that the proposed design addresses the character of Port Dalhousie Heritage Conservation District and its relationship to on-site heritage resources by one, introducing a new construction that is sympathetic to the original building, but also by its materiality, style, and form. We also believe that the design reflects the district evolving urban fabric. I was referring to the eclecticism of the area, which by itself could be also considered as a heritage value. And also the building incorporate heritage-inspired element, but also bring a contemporary functionality and requirement that are fundamental in today's world. We believe that this approach would ensure the contextual integration, that it will align with the heritage conservation goals and probably also be supporting compatible growth within the district, because development is a reality and the heritage buildings do definitely need to connect with that new reality rather than establishing a boundary or a frontier between the two. And finally, the proposed development will also ensure a visual harmony with the neighboring properties, and that would create, at the end, I believe, a more cohesive and attractive streetscape. So how this property, one property will connect with on the other side of the street. This is, again, this is the reality that we are facing. And as a final thought, the property that we have right now is not a representation of what it was. So now I guess the question is that what will be the next stage, the next way to see the site while preserving certain aspects of the HCD that do have some building, they do have all the heritage values and their level of integrity is quite high. But in this case, we're not looking at a building that conveys those values. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And this is our last slide, and it's really just reinforcing we've made Planning Act applications, heritage permit, demolition applications, which have either been deemed complete or accepted by the municipality. And we're working with staff to align all of these applications in terms of the Planning Act timelines and the Heritage Act timelines to bring them forward to a future meeting of council for consideration, which, they will take into account your recommendations. But it's important that I think this is all before council at once to allow them to make an informed and comprehensive decision. So, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for having us here today. We're happy collectively to answer any questions. I'll try to keep mine maybe to a minimum because my voice has just disappeared for some reason.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, thank you for the presentation, and I'm going to open up the floor to for questions or comments by the other committee members. Robert Speck.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I have I have conflicting views on this project. I do like the project and feel it would complement nicely and offset the massive project in the opposing corner plan for development over the next few years. But at the same time, I'm loath to recommend raising of 160 plus year old heritage building. That said, what assurances have we that this project will be built after the heritage property is demolished and, of course, not become a rubble lot for an indeterminate amount of time? We have had some experience in that regard. And my apologies if I missed that part of your presentation.
Thank you. I may look to the city staff to answer in terms of, certain kind of requirements around the timing and the staging of the various permits. But in terms of development, maybe I'll answer on behalf of Joseph and he can kind of elaborate if possible. Veloce Homes is a boutique and not a large builder, and they take on basically one or two projects at a time. I think this is, they're committed to proceeding with this project, notwithstanding some of the economic, conditions that we've seen experienced as of late. They own the property and they're really anxious to proceed. So Joseph, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you summarized it well. I think we're motivated to proceed really with the project as soon as financially viable, as soon as the process can kind of work its way through. The big thing I can say for us is just, getting things done efficiently and in time-worthy manner helps with the process to ensure that, we go straight from a demolition to construction. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would also add too that, this is a project that does have, tenants within it, and, Joseph has been dealing with those. So it's not like they want to demolish something and not have it as be a performing asset in the interim. That's, part of the benefit of having, a building that has apartments in it. It helps pay the rent, so to speak. So they're going to do things in a very practical way in terms of removing the building and then beginning development almost immediately. Thank you.
Dr. Bergen, who is on mute.
There, I'm not on mute anymore. Good. Yes, I have a number of concerns. Just for history, I have lived in Port since 1978. I moved here from Kitchener, and I have thought that Port was just a terrific place to live, to bring up children, and to visit other people to come and see it. I drive past this property multiple times a day. It always gives me a lot of pleasure. It has an expansive green space. It has an enormous working class and immigrant history. People have lived in this house for many, many years. I have a brother-in-law. He came from Holland as a refugee in the 1950s, and he spent 3 or 4 of the happiest years of his life living in a very small apartment. That's all they could afford at the time. He's now a professor in Toronto, but that's where his things began. And I enjoy that. I enjoy the fact that this somewhat ramshackle building has housed all of these people. It is part of our working class heritage and history. And the other thing is, it was about 1860. The earliest houses in Port are right around 1840. This was built 20 years after that. This is one of our very earliest buildings. They don't get a lot earlier than that. And yeah, it doesn't have a lot of remaining character, but that's part of an old community. Things get added onto. You have a place, my house, the core of my house was built in 1840, and then there was a big renovation in 1912, and there's a second one about 1940, a third one in 1967, a centennial project. And then when I got it in 78, we added some more to it. So houses don't stay constant. That it has been changed from its pristine beginnings doesn't bother me at all. That's absolutely the nature of a living, vibrant community. And I understand why Port Dalhousie is for developers a terrific place to build. We have large lots, and it's an attractive community. I get that, and we have a lot of lots that could be used for development, not just this one. I mean, I look around just where I'm sitting in my dining room, and I look around, and there are quite a number of buildings that if you took the house down, you could put up quite a nice and an attractive project. This project is not unattractive. To me, it's not heritage in the sense of Port Dalhousie, but it's certainly not unattractive. Um, and But this is why we have a heritage committee. This is why we are here. We are here to preserve and celebrate the working class character of Port Dalhousie and its origins. We are not a fancy schmancy place. We do not have houses that have fancy filigrees and had governor generals living them and all sorts of stuff. We had ordinary people that lived in this community and lived in it for 2 centuries. And if we go tearing that down, then we're not a heritage committee or a heritage community, and we should just get out of the game and just open it up to the Wild West. So I guess demolishing a building built in the 1860s just doesn't stand well with me. Secondly, we're losing a lot of open space. The existing building, although I know that's 40% coverage only, it looks like it's 89% coverage. It's tall, it's imposing, and it compared to the house that's there, it has nothing in common with it at all. And if intensive, and ultimately, I guess if the question is, if we want intensification, let's get rid of heritage, because if this to me does not contribute to the heritage community of Port Dalhousie. We are what we are, and this is taking a big chunk of land and putting up a large building and putting in a large number of units that will work really well for some high income people. And if that's what we want to do, that's fine. But I really can't say that I'm wildly enthused about this project. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Lorraine, your hand was up next.
Thank you, Brian. First of all, I do agree with David and Robert in that this is a very, very attractive. This is a very attractive building. I really like it. However, I do think it's more suitable for someplace in the GTHA. But I do have some questions after that comment. First of all, and probably this next little piece is probably more council related. I just want to let you know that these are the questions I would see council asking you. This is on a very, very busy corner. I drive past it twice a day. My grandson goes to daycare in the church down the street. It's a busy, busy corner. It's crazy busy in the summer. It's a traffic nightmare. And so when you say the rhythm of the streetscape, in a way that makes me laugh, because the streetscape is one that's already unmanageable at times. And I'm wondering about, so a question I have for you, one of the questions I have for you is, first of all, is there any parking allotted? You said 26 units, 26 spots, but where are the visitors going to park? That's a very big issue in St. Catharines right now. People are complaining about no visitors parking or having to pay for visiting parking. So you can imagine what this will do for visitor parking to the neighborhood businesses. People will be taking those spots. So that's a question. Any visitor parking? Another question is, when I was reading through the information, which was very well done as well, very detailed, complete. One thing I noticed is that one place it's referred to as apartment, and another place it's referred to as condo. So I'm not sure, is this a condo dwelling with high rents? Is it going to be an apartment that maybe includes some opportunity for people who are not able to pay at the high rent? So that's another question I have for you. And then I think the third question, if I was keeping track, actually, what I would think was the third question, is that was there any consideration at all of keeping the 1860 part. You give a very detailed presentation about how all the changes had been made. I personally love the current building, but if there was the 1860 building, could that facade be any part of what this was going to become? Like, I know that, we've talked about that as possibilities with other places. Is there something there that we could say, this is, if we have to get rid of the building, if it absolutely is, crucial in terms of housing, or, if the council says yes, then could there be something there that still says this is the 1860 building? Okay, so those are my questions at this point.
Thank you very much. Through you,
Mr.
Mr.
Paul?
Chair. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the parking, we are providing one space per unit, which meets the bylaw standard. There is no visitor parking. A lot of the uses within the Port Dalhousie port area don't even have parking to begin with, but obviously it will rely upon public, street parking for visitors and for visitor commercial use. We're hopeful some of that comes through active transportation. The tenure, the reason why it's referred to in some places, and I apologize if it's confusing, but through you, Mr. Chair, the built form is an apartment building. The tenure, I understand at this point in time, is going to be condominium, so it will be units that will be sold. There's nothing in the Planning Act or the city's municipal approvals that dictates what tenure has to be. So there can be changes made along the way for rental or condominium. A lot of projects kind of right now are floating in between the two because there's not a lot of condominiums starting today. There's lots of rental being built. And as far as preservation of some component of it in terms of integrating it, I probably can't speak to that as well as Natalie could because she's looked at this in detail. That piece, I'm not sure which exact piece exists and how it would be integrated. But, we're looking at obviously a redevelopment, which has to reconcile a lot of contemporary, issues to contend with around the building code and compatibility. But maybe I'll let Natalie respond to the question about integration.
There is in one of your submissions a picture of where it looks like it's isolated for the 1860 building. So that's what that sort of generated my question as well.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yes, so it's a relevant question. And in fact, every single heritage building that we assess, this is probably the first question we ask. Is there a way to save the building? I've been in the field of heritage since 35 years, and trust me, this is the first question I ask. And on this project, I did review the project, not in terms of having a client, but really by doing due diligence on this project, properly assessing what do we have here, what can be done. And I had some conversation with James about that, and we discussed about the possibility of saying, how can we integrate this building? The challenges that we have is that the remaining of the house, we're talking about the structure from 1860, almost totally gone. If we were to, let's say for the sake of the conversation, restore the building or bring back some aspect, we would, in heritage it's not recommended, because then we enter into a principle, and international charters are very clear about that, what we call it the Disney approach. We cannot recreate heritage. A building has gone through a certain stages and alteration, and to recreate some aspect of a building, bring it back to its original. It was mentioned that the building has gone through so many alterations that at some point there is a point of non-return as well. And when I say point of non-return, what I did not mention during the presentation is that we did also a condition assessment on the building. The building is not structurally in good shape. We're looking at, let's say, just the structure from a heritage point of view is one thing, But from MEP, mechanical, electrical, structural, plumbing, we're looking at a building that is well advanced in its, we call it basically end of life kind of approach. Is it at the end of its life? Probably not, but it's so close. And the challenge that I have is that if we are to recommend to integrate it into a new development, the property itself does not, it will look really like an eyesore if we were to put a building behind this building and incorporate it. So just from an architectural point of view, I think that would be a mistake to do that. To incorporate some element of the properties, we looked at the wall, we looked at any element on the building that could be incorporated. And again, I think the danger we face when we do that, and architecturally, there's many cities that do that, and I've seen a lot of buildings where the developers are doing that. And my expression I use, I call them the Frankenstein buildings, because they have a bit of everything integrated. So it's not the right heritage approach. So I think if there were such a thing as the building going, a project that would act as an element that would link the HCD and the new developments, the commercial. I think there's the risk is that it's going to happen even if we like it or not. This is everywhere. And with this project, when I looked at it, it's rare in my world that we see a developer that has the intention of preserving some of the materiality or have an interest in looking at the area, looking what's there, the heritage attribute, and wants to incorporate it in a project. It's a rarity. It's a real rarity. Most of the time, they don't go there. Most of the time, they go into appeal, OLT, and 93% of the appeal and OLT are won by the developer. So for me, it's a very integrated building that picks up cues from the HCD, from the heritage area, and incorporate it. So, but I would not recommend at all to integrate a facade there.
Just as an FYI, just for your information, because you're probably not as familiar with sort of St. Catharines, is that there is currently a school on Welland Avenue where the developer is keeping some of the facade, and that went through this committee a few years ago. So it is happening in some places in St. Catharines. But thank you very much for answering my questions. I probably have some more as we go along, but I'll give it over to Andrew.
Yep, Andrew.
Okay, mute.
Oh yeah, sorry, just making notes as we go here. I very much appreciate David's passion and everything that he said. I think one of the things he referenced, one of the things he said that stuck with me was that he drives by the building multiple times per day, and it gives him pleasure. I drive by that space multiple times a day, and I quite enjoy that view as well. And you've made the argument that the modifications to the building are such that it no longer tells the stories associated with its origin. And I agree with that, but I also think that it tells the stories of its life since then. And I would argue that being on such a critical corner, the view of that house is part of the experience of Port Dalhousie that has been part of people's experience of Port Dalhousie for at least the last few generations. So what you're seeing there is the way people have experienced that corner and that important corner of Port Dalhousie for quite a while. That evolution is part of the story in my estimation, and our experience of that property is part of the story as well. Now, having said that, while I appreciate David's passion, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, because as you've effectively pointed out, this development addresses some critical needs that we have here in St. Catharines and in Niagara, and several people on the committee have agreed, and I do as well, that this is an attractive approach to intensification. I was happy to see that you said that projects like this should balance planning and heritage. I think finding that balance is critical, and it's something that the heritage sector needs to do a little bit better, is to balance those things. When I look at this plan, though, what I see is that you're looking to demolish a contributing building. There's no preservation aspect. And then you're proposing a development that has multiple inconsistencies with the guidelines for new buildings in the district. So while I'm saying there is a degree to which heritage needs to compromise with development, where do you see the balance in your plan? To me, your plan is completely imbalanced. There's no balance between planning and heritage. It's all planning, no heritage. You said that as well, that this redevelopment offers opportunities to introduce a new structure that better aligns with the form, scale, and character of the HCD. Well, the multiple departures from the guidelines suggest that it doesn't introduce a structure that better aligns with the intention of the HCD. And you refer to this as a transitional area. An interesting perspective, transitional area, a buffer area between the old and the new. But this is not a buffer area, this is a core area right in the heart of the district. So I don't think that argument, while interesting, applies here. So my question to you is, where's the balance in your plan? You've advocated balance. I agree with you that there has to be balance and compromise. Where's the balance from your end? Because I just don't see it in this plan.
I'll answer sort of the question from my perspective. The balance that I see is in relationship to, some of the direction that we see, and as you said, has to be reconciled around, a combination of growth and development, in terms of it being middle kind of density, and as compared to some of the developments that we're seeing elsewhere within Port Dalhousie in the core, in terms of much taller buildings that kind of like what one of the other members said that you would see in Toronto. I don't necessarily see this as a Toronto building, but I think it provides a lot of varied kind of massing, middle density. It's not a tall building. It's a bit taller than maybe some of the taller structures within the core of the residential area. It tries to mitigate some of that height through varied massing, and the fourth floor is put into the roof. I see it mitigating that through some of the parking, dealing with the parking, below grade. As far as the heritage element, maybe I'll look to Natalie to answer that question.
Yes, the project itself, when I say the role of a buffer zone, I understand that buffer zone imply in urban planning something that would be more larger, but because the scale of the HCD is rather small, we're not looking at a large HCD. An element in the landscape that create a visual relationship, something that links the old and the new together, is what I consider either a transitional element or a visual buffer element, or there are multiple words that we use in heritage to convey those elements. And for this building, there are, from an architectural point of view, we are looking at the materiality, we're looking at the stone, we're looking at the rhythm of the windows as well, that conveys that we see on multiple buildings in the HCD, the original buildings, not the one that we see, because in terms of, if we were to sample all the buildings in the HCD, many have gone through a lot of incompatible work on them and transformation. So in that regard, it's just this building conveying some of the heritage attribute. And I hear you when you say, this building initially was, it's something that was built in 1860. I completely understand where you're coming from, because the version of 1860 is no longer there. But in order to allow the urban fabric to evolve, we would want to see some of the heritage value being conveyed in the on a building. And every building, I'm thinking about a project that I worked on recently, the Alexandra Bridge in Ottawa. The bridge is an historic bridge, and it's going to go down because it's right now it cannot be it's such not sound anymore. And the interpretation of the heritage values with the new bridge, it's a completely different bridge. It's a modern take on these heritage values. So for me, this building is a modern take on the heritage values that we have identified on the previous building, not the one that is there, because again, the building that we have there is very limited. And my concern is that we're looking at a building that is so transformed. And unfortunately, from an engineering point of view, the building has also gone through so much transformation that structurally it has impacted the building itself, even the original structure. And whoever is owning the building, who owns the building, might start looking at it's going to be excessively expensive to repair that building, and even restoring the building would cost a fortune. So there is like a balance there to be established, is what can be done to the old building, at what cost, and what will we get at the end of the day if we were to do that. And I would say that the building that we have on site is not a good candidate for restoration, for sure. The second question from the standard and guideline we would ask, is it a good candidate for rehabilitation? But if you look at the standard guideline of historic places in Canada, rehabilitation also include demolition. And the guidelines are very clear about how do we convey the heritage values if there is such a thing as demolition. So in this regard, are we having all the heritage values that are conveyed in this project? We can't. It's a modern take on some of the heritage values, but I think the heritage values that matters, contextual, social, commercial, there are many, many economical, there are many, many urban, there are many values that are conveyed. And in terms of again, the materiality is something that is probably the biggest cues, heritage cues that we are getting there. But it's a modern take. And I understand that it's a completely different approach. But the building is in bad shape. The building that we have there is in really bad shape.
Maybe I can just add one bit to that in terms of the transition piece. I think it's also a transition, between the commercial core, obviously along Main Street, and the residential neighborhood on the other side of the building. So we are providing that commercial activation in the building to sort of transition that use. And in terms of the balance between, heritage and planning, I think part of that is what you don't see. So what we've tried to do with the design is put something from a massing perspective that fits. It's not a 10-story building, it's a modest 4-story building. But also with the design, the slope roofs, the undulations in the buildings. Obviously, those are design factors that we believe helps integrate the heritage feel, but obviously there's an there's a cost of doing so. So, just from the construction standpoint, that's I think a bit of the balance between, the heritage design and planning and density, if you will. Thank you.
Do we have Mark?
Do you think that the commercial approach to Port de Lucie should maintain that port town, that small town feeling, like where smaller buildings represent a feeling of visiting a beautiful town like Port, right? Like we have large buildings downtown. That and I agree. I forget who said there are. David. He said there are plenty of areas where some intensification would be better suited.
I'll take a stab. I consider this to be a medium-sized building. I don't consider it necessarily to be a large building in terms of, relative scales. It's probably a larger building for the port. I mean, there's lots of kind of existing examples from probably 20, 30 years ago of similar kind of buildings along Main Street with, sort of 3 stories in height. This is sort of a more contemporary version of that. But in terms of, the way I think that it's been approached from a design perspective is to use a lot of varied massing horizontally and vertically to kind of break up that, so it doesn't necessarily read as, a similar building, which would be a block really. When you look at some of the massing along up Lock Street, its rhythm is tried to sort of, it's an intensification building. It has 26 units, but it's sort of, it can be read as more of a series of row houses that are connected up Main Street, and then Lock Street, and then along Main Street, it has this podium, but above that, it sort of has that similar kind of rhythm that's meant to sort of break it up and have it not read as, a block, which you might find, elsewhere outside of a historic kind of area like Port Dalhousie. Natalie, can you comment from a heritage perspective on that?
Well, I'm still trust me, I dedicated my whole life in heritage, and I come from a small town, and I live in a small town. In fact, 108 citizens, in fact, where I live, and the pressure are real. The pressure are real on any urban fabric from a heritage point of view. And how do we keep the scale of Port Dalhousie without impacting it? And how do we address, the growth of Port Dalhousie without affecting its heritage value and what it conveys right now, what it says to those who are visiting Port Dalhousie? And I have developed over the years an understanding, and based on discussion with many other heritage experts, that sometimes there are some aspect that needs, because they are at a point of non-return, that they need to go. But they don't need to go at all costs. That doesn't mean that when we say a building, I'm thinking, for example, in Hamilton, the Tivoli Theater that is going to be demolished, an institution, a cultural institution that is about to be demolished. The building is at the end of its life. But if we go back in the history of a building like that, we can see that there was at some point a point of non-return. And now the building is going to be demolished, and the building, because the building in Port Dalhousie right now is there. We are looking at a building that has very, very important structural issues. And unfortunately, this is very much because of the alteration and changes over time that has been done to this building, that the building has paid the price. The heritage building has paid the price. So although we reconnect it to the scale of Port Dalhousie, the project that is on the table right now, I talk about visual cues. I think the scale of the building is reasonable. It addresses some growth so it does kind of address some of the necessities in terms of growth. But we're also, by having this buffer place, protecting the HCD. I know it sounds a little strange by saying that, but allowing a building that establishes a clear delimitation or buffer between, okay, this is the old part, this is the heritage section, and this building kind of is the transition. We do protect, because otherwise, quite often, it goes one building at a time. And in fact, and I can see other buildings that are at risk in the area. And this is the question is that how do we transition? Any heritage area is meant to evolve, but the real question is where do we want it to evolve? And by either designating, recognizing, keeping it intact, we do know from many, many studies now that this is not the way to protect heritage district. There's tons of studies on that. In fact, it's one of the worst approach. So now we're more that was maybe true 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I started. Now the approach is, okay, how do we merge? How do we address all those approaches? And while maintaining the small scale of and the scale of Port Dalhousie. So, but it's a fine balance. I agree. It's a fine balance.
Mark?
Yes, I do have a few more questions. I know that the structural integrity has been mentioned a few times now, and maybe I missed it. Is there an engineering report, structural engineering report, that was given to us to review as well?
Yeah, so we had the two, so there was an engineering report, but there's also an architectural, a specialized heritage architect that was on the file that did also evaluate the building. There's some sign, I mean, there's, I believe in the HIA, I believe the condition assessment has been provided. So I invite you to, and with photos, and so I invite you to look at the HIA that does explain in the condition assessment report the situation for this building.
Yep, Mark, go ahead.
Yes, and another question. Kind of building on Lorraine's comment of parking already. I know that the building footprint is taking up most of the lot, it looks like, where there's no additional visitor parking. And right now, if there's just enough for just the number of units in there, there's multiple people that usually live in a home, multiple cars. To add to that, most people are parking. Port Dalhousie fills up pretty quickly, parking. So everyone's parking in front of people's homes already. A lot of the times in the summer, the lot is full and you're walking, 15 minutes down Main Street to get a parking spot or farther. So is there what was considered to not fill the whole, or was it considered to not fill the whole lot with units and just enough parking underground, or to add some spaces at least?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I follow the exact question. Like we've optimized kind of the footprint of the building, and then we've also used parking stackers to bring the number up to meet the bylaw in terms of one space per unit.
Most people have like 2 cars. Usually there's 2 cars per household most of the time. So where would everyone else be parking and visitors?
Yeah, my experience with sort of higher density, apartment type development is that people basically make decisions at the purchase time, that they basically buy parking to serve their future decision in terms of downsizing and living in that type of environment. We're not seeing, take up of that type of space in apartment dwellings. I don't see that kind of same kind of utilization in this type of development in my projects across the province. If you're talking about, single detached housing and other, and then it's offset by, some people choose not to have cars. So, I mean, it's a city bylaw requirement that we're adhering to. And the city is trying to encourage active transportation, and limiting parking is a transportation demand measure that the city abides by.
Have you considered, say, reducing a few units to accommodate more parking? Because it is a very busy intersection. So to add another 26 cars coming in and out all day, that's adding to a lot of the traffic.
Yeah, adding parking I'm not sure is the solution to it. I mean, you want to kind of curb people's behavior by creating a limitation on it. In terms of the parking location, what we've tried to do is put the parking entrance where the existing driveway entrance is today, as far away from the intersection as possible so that it doesn't interfere with the operation of that corner. There are opportunities potentially, should demand, through the sales of the units, to add more parking through the use of stackers. But we've believed that we've sized it appropriately based upon our experience with demand with similar types of projects.
Okay.
If I may also add, we've added short-term and long-term bicycle parking. Thank you.
I think Dr. Bergen had his hand up first.
Right, I'll try and be a little bit less like I'm on a rant. A couple of things. One is Natalie mentioned that this would anchor the heritage area by that's new over there, and beyond this is all old. My experience, I've been on the Heritage Committee for 15 years, is that when developers come along, or people that want to buy a property in Port and tear it down and build their dream house, they look at precedent. So they look at houses that we have approved or have been approved. We didn't approve them all. And then they say, well, this got approved. How can you not approve my project? So for instance, I looked at the property that's next door to this one. Well, if I were to buy that and this got built, it would be very difficult for the Heritage Committee to say that, well, a similar development right next door would be inappropriate because, or especially if it's just slightly smaller. So that's one concern. I don't buy the anchoring argument. And I'm not a planner. I don't understand all the planning jargon, and there is much being used here, and I really appreciate how much study all of you folks have had, and I'm humbled by it, but I'm just a dentist. Anyhow, but the other thing is old buildings in Port. Again, the comment that it was well advanced in its life. Does this mean that we drive around Port Dalhousie and look for houses that are built sort of prior to 1870 and say, well, they're getting pretty long in the tooth. I think we can just level those guys and use those as building lots now. I don't think that's the way that we as a Heritage Committee want to operate, are instructed to operate, or want to think about operating. When you buy an old property, there's a responsibility to keeping it intact. I bought my house in 1978. And since then, I have spent a minor fortune keeping the place in good shape. That's part of the price of owning an old house in Port Dalhousie, of owning heritage. And is it simple? No. Is it inexpensive? No. Is it necessary? Yes. And so we do see demolition by neglect. We see people who buy old houses and do nothing, and then they come to the Heritage Committee hat in hand, and we've had a couple of these saying, well, look at this, it's all, the plaster is lifted, the windows are smashed, and that happens. But a well-maintained old house can keep going for a long, long, long time. It's not inexpensive, it's not simple, but it's part of the responsibility that one takes on when one buys an old house in Port, in a heritage district. Thank you.
Lorraine, you were next.
Hi, I was just following up on something that Mark had said in relation to what I had said. And so basically, when I was talking about the sort of that impact on the neighborhood, I was talking about the fact that, yes, parking is at a premium. And I understand Bruce's point about, we don't want to encourage that behavior. On the other hand, there's a lot of retail spaces. You're going to have some retail spaces, if I remember correctly. Where are those people going to park? You want them to come to your retail place. You're talking about transportation. Our city transportation is not that well used, but the problem partly also is that recently, or fairly recently, there's been a lot of talk about the dangerous nature of Port Dalhousie's single entrance in. And so Councillor Williamson just recently was talking to me about the fact that he finds this dangerous. And I agree with him that there's only that one entrance into Portaluzzi, and you're adding to that. And so while that might not be part of our heritage piece, I'm sort of preparing you for the fact that when this gets to city council, I would imagine that the neighbors, that the people in that area will be resistant to the idea of bringing all of this in to the neighborhood. So while I have concerns about the heritage, I also have concerns for the people in that neighborhood. Again, beautiful, beautiful property. And when I said GTHA, I just meant that kind of place adding to the traffic of the neighborhood. So sort of to clarify what Mark was saying, and based on what I had said, it's the constant movement of cars, the stop and go at that corner. It's not conducive to a place that large. And so I wish that you could have at least made it a bit smaller, that it was less people, less. Yes, you can, maybe you can't take my idea of the 1860, which of keeping some of that facade, but it's too large. It's too large on what was a beautiful building, in my opinion. And maybe it's past its lifetimes, the lifetime of the building. I'm sure that something could have been done to maintain some of the building. Anyways, I won't belabor the point.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine. And just what you're saying too, I mean, with the proposed new tower proposal that's going to go across the street where the port tower was supposed to go, I mean, that's going to, add to that density and traffic flow as well whenever that gets built. Holly, did you have a point?
Basically, I walk the dog a lot down Main Street beside the beautiful stone fencing. I'm just questioning what's happening with the stone fencing. I walk up Lock Street all the time, and I'm picturing myself if I'm going to sit on one of your balconies. What is my view? Is it the white wall across the street with the bushes and the houses sitting on top of the hill? Am I able to see any water view with the height? I also had questions about, I always think about the mechanics of the building. If we're landlocked with the parking, where are services taking place? Where are trucks pulling up to deliver furniture? Where are, all these different things? Even like, I always think of garbage disposal. I think of everything what the tenants are going to be using. Parking. My daughter lived on Simcoe Street. She had one space. Well, when I would go to try to visit her, I would drive around the block probably 10 times. I could never find parking. There was never parking on Dalhousie in the summer. You'd have to park very far away. And everyone has a problem with parking on that little section between Lock Street, Dalhousie, Simcoe, Maine, that little block. And everybody has figured out, instead of parking pass in the summer, they park along Dalhousie and then walk down the stairs to the beach, right? So there's lots of issues. That's my feedback, and just wanted to ask you what's going to happen with this original stone wall too.
Maybe I can take that. So the intent of sort of the main level of that wraps around the parking, the intent of that is to mimic that stone wall that is currently there. So that'll be a natural stone wall meant to be in place of, the existing retaining wall. You had a question about the height. I think that's relevant in that our building really in context, and you compare it across the street to the other house that's up on the berm, the height of our building will be quite similar to that building's total elevation. And then with respect to, services and how a garbage truck is going to get into the building. So there is the underground parking that basically has private, it'll have private garbage pickup. So a garbage truck will pull it into, the underground area. But again, these are a lot of details that we continue to refine and work through once we get through get to the site plan stage with the city. So all those issues we will continue to sort of refine and look at.
And when we use the word mimic, I know some, people don't take kindly to that, but it's really drawing influence from, and sorry, Joseph, I'm not trying to be critical, but I just want to clarify that it's that material that influences, the selection of the materials for the foundation of the building and the podium and the garage. And again, those are items that, have they're shown conceptually, and that will be further fleshed out during the site plan stage. And as I mentioned, I know a few years ago there used to be an opportunity where you would deal with the Heritage Committee through rezoning and planning applications. Then you would come again to the committee for site plan applications and deal with the permit and have input on those kinds of things. So, there'll be work with staff on, and the urban design staff and heritage staff on the compatibility of the final design in terms of that material palette and color palette. And, a lot of times when we do these types of applications in the later stages through the site plan approval process, we will have material and color palettes that are submitted as part of the application. And that is something that, is important to further solidify how compatible things are with the character of the area.
And if I may add, that's a discussion that I had with Joseph many times about, because the character defining elements of the property, the wall by itself is one of them as much as the history of, so there are certain aspects of the property that convey some, but the wall is also in a pretty bad condition. And the wall has also lost, the retaining wall, the masonry retaining wall has lost also its contextual relevance as well, because on the other side, the property that is on the side, the original masonry walls that were once there are gone. This is a concrete retaining wall. And so from a symmetrical point of view, the way we enter the HCD, that's the other aspect that we looked at. How do we enter the HCD? And is there a possibility of having some form, we're talking about transitional, but I'm also looking, okay, there were once an intention of making it symmetrical on one side and the other. This symmetry is lost as well, because the heritage values of the house that is on the other side of the street has gone through a lot of transformation too. So we're looking at two houses that once were meant to maybe be in harmony and in symbiosis, but now they are disconnected in many, many ways. So by bringing back on a new development, I call it conveying the heritage value, bringing back some of the heritage values, but bringing back some of the stonework within the new development is one way among many to bring back some of the heritage values that were once there on the property. So that was just a point I wanted. And it's not mimicking, which is an approach we don't at all endorse at any level, or it's and I don't want Joseph to say anything. As you can see, there's a reaction behind the word mimic, but it's not mimicking. It's really conveying the heritage values from our perspective.
Mark, did you have a point?
Yeah, I think it was. Maybe I'm off the pulse on demand for this kind of building right now, especially in the small town of Port, and like St. Catharines isn't a very walkable city by any means. So. I'm just thinking about who's going to be buying these, like the people that can afford to buy a condo or rent a condo. Are they going to be taking public transit? I'm not too sure about that. I think it's just too large of a development here, or something like that, to support it.
And Maria, you had a point?
Yes, just a quick question for Natalie, if she wouldn't mind indulging me again on a point about if you could highlight for me just a couple of concrete examples aside from the stone wall that you just mentioned, a couple examples of how the proposed development aligns with the HCD goals. You mentioned picking up cues from heritage. And I'm wondering if you could just give me some simple 2 or 3 examples of how your proposal does align with those HCD goals, please, Natalie.
Yes, so I think the first one for sure is the roof line. I think the gable roof is one of them that we see across the HCD. And when I talk about the heritage attributes, is yes, those that are there as of now, but those as well that were once there that made the Port Dalhousie. And if we look back at 1860 and everything that came, let's say late 19th century, there are still queues everywhere in the HCDs that we see. And I think the new building take cues from those heritage values that were once there. The other thing is the role of the building itself. We're looking at a residential building. The residential aspect of the building is, as of now, it is a residential building. It was once a residential building, and this function is going to be maintained. And also the fact that it does engage with the streetscape. I think once the building was the actual building, these stone walls, all those elements from an urban landscape point of view, are engaging this property as it is now into the landscape. It's a way to transition from a residential area to a commercial area. Historically, it has been there for a very long time. So the building does exactly that. It does allow this urban landscape language where the streetscape it is maintained. The building does not go further than the streetscape. The building maintains this alignment. The building is alignment with the stone walls. So there are many aspects of the building, and of course, the landmark feature, because I was referring to those 2 buildings. It's clear that those 2 buildings, when they had those 2 retaining stone walls originally, were landmarks. This was a way to enter this area. I haven't studied the other building, but I would be very interested to know how one did influence the other. And now, unfortunately, when one started to be impacted, the other one did start to lose that. And now we have 2 buildings, 2 potentially landmarks that are gone in terms of their role. So I think this building can act as a form of new landmark, a modern take, a contemporary take as landmark. No, it's not the 2 buildings. Of course, this won't be that, but it's a reinterpretation of what is a landmark and its role. And I think the word that maybe I haven't used yet, but I think it's one of the most important in heritage that we use all the time is the holistic approach. Is that as much as we are looking at a development, we have to see in 10 years, and 20 years, and 50 years, what's going to happen holistically to the area. And by not allowing development, we're forcing, I call it, sorry for the expression, but I forcing sometimes putting a circle in a square, right? And when it does happen in an urban fabric, that's probably the worst that can happen in a heritage area where things are forced into. By having a project that has an holistic approach, which it's in context, in relation, transitional, consider the heritage attributes, we're all having the ingredients for holistic integration. Not only for this building, I would highly recommend to look further in the guidelines and for future intervention on the side, the increase the guidelines. What from a holistic point of view, the area should be in 10, 20, 50 years. And that's maybe where the assessment I did, I'm not only looking at this building now, I'm looking, will this building fit in 10, 20, 50 years? And the answer at the end of the impact assessment was yes, because we all know that development, one way or another, will impact, and buildings will be demolished because of just their condition, because they were not well maintained. So it's a long answer, but that's
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, I had a couple of points that I wanted to make about about the building. Number one, I'd hate to see a structure that was built potentially around 1860 be demolished, because it is, one of the oldest buildings around that intersection. I mean, you've got the old jail and the what I've always heard called the customs house on the other side of the street, which are, from the 1840s or 1850s. I mean, this building was, potentially, a tavern, a hotel at one point, commonly called the Klondike by the local residents. And there's a lot of history associated with the early families, particularly Reed, May, and in your assessment of the building, you talked about Owen Corcoran. Actually, it wasn't Owen Corcoran, it was Owen McMahon, who owned the building at the time. There was no such person as Owen Corcoran, as far as I can tell. And then, of course, George Howe, who was a lock tender on the canal. So it's got a lot of canal-related significance. And that relates to my next point that I was going to make is there going to be any archaeological monitoring done on the site, particularly with that empty part of the lot that has the stone wall around it, because of the proximity of the first and second Welland canals, and the fact that Owen McMahon was a teamster on the canal. There may have been potentially some kind of structure on that empty portion of the lot that there could be archaeological remains there. And you sort of answered my question about the stone wall, whether it's going to be retained or not. It would be nice to see the stones kept. There is some story that those stones may have been brought to Port Dalhousie as ship's ballast. And when they were unloaded, they were simply, used to build that retaining wall. So it would be nice to see the stones actually kept and, remortared, repositioned into the development. If you can't save the building itself, are any of the interior timbers going to be saved for inclusion within the development? As for underground parking, of course, we all know Port Dalhousie has a fairly high water table. So is underground parking going to be kept pumped out? Because, it could fill up quickly with water because you're getting, pretty close to that harbor level. And you also said that the cost of restoring the building is going to cost a fortune. Well, what is the relation of the cost of restoring the old building, if you did go to that point, versus the overall cost of constructing the new building that you're proposing? Is it going to be like a hugely cost prohibitive thing in proportion to the new build? So these are all questions that I've had in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm. In order to, so from a heritage point of view, again, when we talk about restoration, we also have to look at, do we have a good candidate for restoration? So, in the first question, as someone in architecture, I would say, do we have the original drawings? And we don't. Do we have enough information on the building itself? And we don't. And you're right, in terms of the name associated with the building, it was challenging to find, because all the documents are not confirming 100% the relationship of the building with some of the names. So that is one thing that is, so the option of restoring a building like that, and what are we restoring exactly? Are we, because there is such a thing as embracing, for example, if you have a building from the early 19th century that was built, let's say a Victorian house, and all of a sudden you have a conservatory that would be added on the side of the building from 1920, those two elements have heritage values. So that's a question we have to ask. Do the intervention have added values? And the answer is no. They were done with poorly, unfortunately. And so in order to restore, we would have to bring back the building to a state that would be approximation of what the building was once, and this is definitely not an approach that is recommended in heritage. The other question, if I recall, you mentioned the archaeological assessment. I think it's part of the process. It would be fundamental because this is something that in relation to the canal, any site, I would say, of heritage value would need probably an archaeological assessment and an AOA, as we call it, and that would be a way to inform us probably even more. In fact, interestingly, quite often we learn more about our heritage property when we're demolishing the property than when we have the building itself. So maybe we would find the old foundations. We would find some elements in the ground that would inform us. And the approach, because there is another approach in heritage to preserve, and we call it heritage recording. So where we go through, in fact, it's to say, okay, the building is at such a state that right now it will be a challenge to restore it or integrate it to a new project. But the heritage recording is a way to say we're going to document as much as we can every single aspect of this building. We're going to do an archaeological assessment to document everything. And if someone ever say 32, what was 33 Lock? Someone in 100 years wants to know what was once 33 Lock. Not that, yes, 33 Lock as it is now, but we also are very interested by 1860. Could someone know about this building in 100 years? And that's a way to preserve the memory of the building itself. So in a situation like that, I would probably, the next step to Joseph, I would say maybe, to recommend a heritage recording of the building. It's not an exercise that takes that long, but it's definitely a way to preserve in the long run, because we have to look at this building and could we say the building will be there in 100 years? I don't think so, but could we have a heritage recording with the technology, especially in today's world? This is very efficient, and most heritage site goes through that now. I'm thinking about, Parks Canada. All their heritage building go through an heritage recording process if there's such a thing as demolition. And we're talking about some buildings are national significant that are going down because they cannot maintain them, and they have the budget to maintain them, but they are at a point of non-return. So there's that. This is a reality. So there are different options, but the archaeological assessment is probably one of those where we're going to learn not only about the property, but about Port Dalhousie itself. So I would definitely that probably in the process anyway. That parts of the things that we need to do anyway.
I can add to that. So phase 1 and phase 2 archaeological assessment was done, and nothing of interest was found. So that's been submitted to the ministry. I believe it's been accepted by the ministry as well. In terms of salvaging what we may find during demolition, we're absolutely open to taking a look at what comes out of that. I'm happy to, if they can't be repurposed or reused, happy to also make them available to community members who may be interested. So we can definitely continue to have those discussions.
Okay, so I guess if we don't have any further questions, considering that the afternoon is progressing here, I guess we should maybe take a vote on this issue. Perhaps Tammy, you could clarify. We have to make a motion in the positive on this, on the demolition.
Through the chair, staff are looking for a direction to report on to council. So before you right now is the request for a demolition.
But it has to be a motion in the positive for the demolition, right? That we should say the Heritage Committee recommends approval of the proposed demolition?
If that's the motion that the chair would like to put forward. So the resolution that's on the screen right now says that the St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee recommends approval/denial of the proposed demolition of 33 Locke Street. So it would be up to the committee to make a motion for approval or denial and then have a vote.
Okay, because I understood that it always had to be, or should be in the positive. That we would recommend approval of the demolition.
Brian, and then we
yeah.
would vote, and if no one voted on it, that meant it was denied. Isn't that what James said?
So let's try that. Generally with council, we have a motion, the staff recommendation is on the screen, and then council votes on the staff recommendation. And then if that fails, they put forward an alternate. If James has advised in the past to start with the approval and then go that way, I'm happy to accept that direction as well.
Yeah, because I think the motion should be we recommend approval of the demolition and then take a vote and see if that passes or not.
That's what James usually has us do. You're right, Brian.
Great. We can proceed that way. Thank you.
Okay, so we have the motion on the screen. If that's okay, does somebody wish to make this motion?
And then here, James would say, just because you make the motion doesn't mean that you're going to vote in the positive.
Yeah, that's right.
I just had a question. I'm not if I'm allowed to make to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like normally, in all the years of being on this committee, we used to get invited to go to the property to do actually
Site inspection.
Site inspection, and that was always just part of the whole process. Just wondering how come we didn't have time to do that. That's all.
And we did that on Bayview, didn't we? Just recently.
So through the chair, if I may, this application was very recently received, and as we are trying to meet our Planning Act deadlines to get in front of council at a certain time, this was the best agenda that we could fit it on. So I apologize. That was a staffing decision to be made for this to be considered in a more expedient fashion.
Okay, so back to the motion. Does somebody wish to make this motion?
I'm fine to make the motion, Brian.
Andrew, okay, thank you. And all in favor of the motion? Maria, you're voting in favor of demolition?
Yes.
So one in favor, and I guess the rest of us are not, so I guess it didn't pass.
Through the chair, thank you for clarifying. That's the motion that we will report to council with.
So I guess Lauren can rejoin the discussion now.
There we go.
Glad to see you back.
Nice to be back.
A question about clarification. Do we now not consider the design, or is that only if demolition is approved, that comes back to us to consider, or do we weigh in on that now?
So through the chair, if I may, the demolition needs to be considered by council, and as this committee did not support the demolition, it's not expected that the heritage permit would be supported as well. So ultimately council will be making that decision. However, should it be the will of the Heritage Committee to also assess the permit application at this time, I'm happy to take that direction to council as well.
Thank you for the clarification. I asked because my impression is that you guys are probably going to, notwithstanding our vote, you're going to probably take this to council anyway, and in the event that it's approved, I don't want to lose our opportunity to weigh in on that side of it.
Thank you. Through the chair to the member, staff have yet to undertake our analysis of the complete application. It would be helpful if we had direction from the Heritage Committee on the permit application, so perhaps that dialogue should take place now. I am cognizant of the remaining agenda items and people who are present to delegate. So I'll defer to the chair of the committee to lead that conversation. If there are any heritage related questions remaining for the consultant or the architect on the permit portion, that could be appropriate now.
Okay, well, if we want to have that discussion, Andrew, did you have stuff you wanted to say about it?
Well, I would just refer back very quickly, for the sake of time, to my earlier comments that the proposed development has a number of inconsistencies with the guidelines, and I think those were identified in the report that we did see. So I think it's problematic.
Rachel, did you have a comment?
I was enthusiastically nodding, so I just agree with Andrew's points about the report we received and the inconsistencies. And I take the points made by the presenters about the height being, I think, consistent with other buildings due to the slope. However, 3 to 4 stories is not consistent with the actual stories of the surrounding buildings, which I think are primarily 1 and 2, with some exceptions for 3. I note that in their report, they say 1 to 3 stories, but that really isn't reflective of the majority of buildings in Port Dalhousie. I think the majority of them are 1 to 2, with the odd 3, and this 3 to 4 story building is quite distinct. That stuck out. And I also wanted to share, I don't know that this was brought up, but I know we've discussed the landscape a bit, but the removal of the trees I also find disconcerting. I think there are quite a few mature trees that are going to be removed, at least half, I think I identified on the chart. So I'm somewhat disappointed by that as well.
Do we have other comments about it?
I liked the point that was brought up previously about that you had asked as well, and I don't think we got an answer to that. Would any of the materials be used as well? So thinking about Holly and what she had said about the stones and what you had said, Brian, about would there be anything remaining from the structure outside or inside that would contribute to the building?
Yeah, because I mean, I was thinking about things like a building from 1860. It probably would have had, like, hand-hewn timbers and things like that, which would be great character enhancing elements to, include within the new building.
And I'd also like to see, Joseph had mentioned, no, maybe it might have been Natalie, that taking the sort of the temperature of the building as it was being demolished, not that we want it to be demolished, but the idea that no matter what happens in the design, there should be history that's present in whatever is done to that building. Am I being contrary here to, am I being contradictory? I'm just saying that I don't want it demolished, but whatever does happen to that building needs to have some kind of clues, some kinds of pictures or video or something, some kind of historical significance remembered.
Right. Yep. Even a plaque too outside the building.
Something
that was covered in their HIA report, that they would incorporate some plaque of some sort, if I remember correctly reading. Yeah.
But I remember when we talked about memorial, they were going to put in the lobby of the building, they were going to put they were going to dedicate an area to at least remembering, like where they were going to keep the facade, and they were also going to keep some memorabilia from the building.
Nice.
Dr. Bergen. You're on mute.
There, unmuted. I was opposed to demolition, obviously, but beyond the demolition, I think that the if we simply considered this as an empty piece of land, if the city says, okay, demolition is reasonable, now we, as a heritage committee, should think about the design, the massing, and so on. I like the design. I think the design is really good. I like the eaves and so on. But the volume of the building is just way off scale for what I think should be there. If something were twice the size of the existing building, I could live with that. But this is a huge project, and it will have a real impact on the perceived heritage value of Port Dalhousie.
Yeah, that was my impression as well, that, you know, I like the design, but it seems to be a little top heavy for that corner, you know. And then by the time you get the new development, when it goes up on the opposite corner, it's just going to be like, you're going to feel like you're hemmed in, you know.
I know I've repeated this, but there's too much impact on that corner with that large a building. And the lack of consideration for that is striking to me.
Okay, so all this discussion that we've just had, do we have to have any kind of emotion about that, or just, is it just going to be included in our minutes and that'll be presented to council?
Through the chair, the option is yours. We're happy to include the conversation from the minutes incorporate that into the staff report. Alternatively, if there's a motion that the committee would like to formalize, we're happy to accept that direction as well.
So basically saying that, you know, we're not happy with, we like the design, but it's too much for that corner, something along that line.
I think it would be best if any guidance provided was directly related to the heritage guidelines.
How does the rest of the committee feel about that? I personally think that we probably would be better off having the discussion we've had in our minutes presented to council.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Rachel?
Can I just add, are we not able to do both? Like if we make a motion, does that then exclude the option to present certain portions of the minutes, or is it like a one or the other type deal?
Through the chair to the member, it is not a one or the other. We would present both positions.
I just thought it might be more impactful if we had a vote as well, in addition to the comments that we've made. That's just my thought. I'm happy to defer to the chair. If you'd rather have the minutes, that's entirely fine.
Do you want to make a motion?
Just a little on the spot, yeah. I'm wondering if it's something about the council approve the, I guess, construction design of the building as it conforms to heritage or guidelines, and then, you know, I would not be voting for it, but if we need to make it in the positive, it would be something along the lines of approving the build as proposed.
Andrew?
I'm not sure how we can vote in the positive and still directly reference the guidelines. I think we have to reference the elements of the guidelines that we are basing the decision on. And I'm not even sure those have been, you know, we've referred to it, but I don't think they've been expressly included in the minutes. I'm happy to summarize that for the minutes if that would be helpful. But I do think if we're going to vote, we have to reference those things. To Tammy's point, I think that's important.
And Mark, you had a point?
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the wording for it. Like the size of the building doesn't relate to other heritage buildings in the area. It's just something like that, if we can work off of that.
I would recommend we use the language that's in the report that we have, which is, I believe it was James that prepared it, and he references that. It says that height and massing are not consistent with the guidelines. As well, I think he references the massing again. Also, the being flush with the property lines is not consistent with the required setbacks. Although I'm not sure that's an HCD issue so much as it's a zoning issue. He also references that the large massing goes beyond 3 bays, and the attempt to break up the facade with different materials for each unit is not meet the intention of the guideline. He also references the roof line, which we've discussed, which is partially is not entirely consistent with the guidelines, meaning the different elements incorporating different types of roof lines is not entirely consistent with the guidelines as well. Scanning it quickly. I think those are the primary points outlined.
Right.
And those are along the lines of what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think Mark was next.
I think Tammy was, actually.
Was she? Well, Tammy?
Thank you. And through the chair, if it would be helpful, perhaps a recommendation for some wording could either be what the second last sentence of the report by the heritage planner states, is that the committee does not support the granting of a permit as it does not meet the guidelines as discussed in the report. It could be something flexible like that, or it could be something like the Heritage Committee is identifying whether or not they think the building should receive a heritage permit. So I don't think we need to get down into articulating certain sections in the motion. You are more than welcome to provide an opinion that it doesn't meet the heritage guidelines as a singular sentence.
Actually, the first version that you just gave sounds pretty good.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So if we could adopt that wording as a motion.
Okay. Bear with me. Oops. Just bear with us for a second while we fix the wording here.
I just want to say this was a really good idea, Andrew, Brian, and Tammy, and everybody else to go back to what James already did and in the remarkable, that was a greatly worded heritage report. And so I think that we should use that language. And I think that, I think that was a great idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Maria, you've got a question?
Right. Sorry to introduce this thought to the motion being crafted. I thought it might be an idea to amend that motion, which I know is still in process, to recognize that the proposal does not meet in its entirety the guidelines, but it does meet them according to James's input in 4 of them, 4 of the guidelines. if I'm looking at what he sent to us in his analysis on this proportion and massing, he says the applicant has attempted to break up the facade with different materials. And then on the roof section, he says the proposal is not entirely consistent with this guideline. Roofing material has not been confirmed. And then he says for materials, the proposal is largely consistent with the guidelines, and they're in keeping with the guidelines and have been approved throughout the Heritage District. And then the last point he made was that with the windows, that other windows throughout are largely consistent with the guidelines and would not be out of place with the district. And he notes that the commercial unit and the large windows, he said there are no guidelines for commercial unit entrances. So just to be objective, I'm wondering if it would be more factual to say that it does not entirely meet, yes, with the heritage guidelines, inferring that it does meet some of them. Just to be objective about it.
Yeah, but I mean, in this case, we're sort of trying to reflect what the opinion of the committee is as well.
Based, and our opinion is based on the analysis that was given to us on the guidelines. So I think that captures it, does not entirely meet the heritage guidelines. I'm fine with that.
I would rather word that does not meet many of the heritage guidelines.
Well, you could take account, I guess.
Because one is sort of positive, the other one is negative, and I think we're feeling a little bit negative. I mean, you're using rose-colored glasses, and I'm using gray glasses.
And we're not including the strong points he put, like for example, the one, like we're not going down that road of all the points, because look at the point about the people who lived there, the historic character, and the fact that he's negating something that they told us over and over and over again in the presentation, that it did not contribute. And yet James's report says it does contribute. He says, you know, not only is the property a contributing property in the Heritage District, and yet I believe in the presentation, they kept saying it wasn't a contributing property. So we're not saying some of the really strong points James has. So we have to be careful here that, you know, by putting one big statement, we have to be careful that it does convey the tone.
Rachel?
Yes, I wanted to add that there is a line in that James had in his report right above staff recommendation where he says that overall the proposed development is not consistent with the guidelines. Perhaps if we're leaning more in the negative, as David said, we could say the proposed design overall is not consistent with the guidelines, or use language to that effect. I'm wondering how people feel about that.
Good.
Good.
Yeah, that's
I would
good.
support that.
Yeah, sure. But does the motion that we have here not sort of reflect that, where it says it doesn't entirely meet?
Well, it's semantics, I guess. Yeah.
Entirely means to me, entirely does not entirely meet means that it almost does, just not quite. And I don't think that's how we're feeling. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well,
I think what Rachel said was sort of a better interpretation of the tone of the group. The overall, it does not meet it.
Okay, let's go with that then. Okay. Are we happy with this motion?
I would have probably put overall as the overall proposed design does not meet. I would have put it earlier.
Yeah. How about does not fully meet the heritage guidelines?
Let's just stick with James's wording. the overall, I think.
I'd be happy with this one.
Yeah, I think this is better. Yeah.
Okay, does somebody wish to make this motion?
I will.
Lorraine, thank you. And all in favor of this motion? Okay. Done. Boy, that was a long discussion, wasn't it?
It was.
Okay, so is Lorraine back with us now at this point? Or Lauren, I mean?
Lauren?
I think I'm back now. I can come back now.
Okay.
Two good motions. It's great.
So next, I guess we're moving on to the trolley plaque at this point. So we can get Hank
Through
on
the
his way.
chair, we have item 8.3 first. An information item regarding the Masonic Temple building at 37 Ontario Street.
Yep.
Do we have someone to make a presentation about that?
That's just me.
Well then, because I was wondering if we wanted to get to let Hank do his presentation and get him on his way, and then we can go back to the Masonic.
I'm good either way. Depends on what the approach that the committee wants to make. But yeah.
Or how much Hank wants to get out of here. Hank, what's your opinion? Do you want to go now, or do you want to wait?
I'm fine. I suspect from what I think, I don't think 8.3 is going to be too long. So if Lauren wants to do it first, that's fine. I've sat here throughout the whole thing already, so I don't mind waiting.
Okay, 8.3, 37 Ontario Street, the Masonic Temple building. Lauren, take it away.
They're both just information items, so it's just presenting the information. You guys can have some discussion, but but it's not the same thing. So hello everyone. So this is an information item on a 33-story mixed-use development that's proposed at 37 Ontario Street and 3 Ontario Lane, which includes a registered building known as the Masonic Temple building. So we have like a picture here for everyone for context. Just to provide some background, the city's planning department hosted a public consultation on December 5th at City Hall, where about 30 to 40 people attended. And additionally, they have had several emails that they received as a part of the consultation process. So while because it's a registered building and they're retaining it, there's no legislative requirement to bring this item to the Heritage Advisory Committee. Some of the questions from the public regarding committee review alongside staff's judgment has led to us bringing this to you as an information item, just so that you have the opportunity to review and offer feedback if you wish, and to make sure you're looped into what's happening at this site. So right now, this is just at the zoning amendment stage. It hasn't gotten to the site plan approval stage yet. So it is kind of early on in the process, and also because the property is only registered, it doesn't require a heritage permit. They're not proposing demolition. It's important to note that the applicant has waived the timeline for designation under Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that we do anticipate that this property will be evaluated for designation following the completion of the application. And additionally, detailed design work hasn't been completed for this project yet. I'm going to show you some preliminary drawings, but they have retained a designer who with the intent of being sensitive to the historic fabric of the Masonic Temple, and as the building is retained. So just a quick overview of the proposal. The architectural drawings up here. So there are two properties associated with this proposal. 37 Ontario Street, which includes the 3-story Masonic Temple building and an adjacent parking lot, and 3 Ontario Lane, which has a surface parking lot adjacent to an auto garage. The proposed development is a 33-story, 109-meter tall mixed-use building featuring 308 residential units, commercial and office space on the lower levels, and 3 levels of underground parking. And then a zoning bylaw amendment is required to permit the height and mixed-use nature of the development, and that's kind of where we are now. So, even though this property is only on the register, the applicant has submitted a heritage impact assessment, and basically the heritage impact assessment has identified the following heritage impacts and potential mitigation measures. First, for the Masonic Temple building, which like you can see here and here, it's being retained. It's going to attach to the tower at the side here and at the rear where the parking is. So it has 2 kind of walls of interaction with the development. The rehabilitation and adaptive reuse of the building is proposed, retaining a lot of the key heritage elements, such as the principal facade. The building's ground floor will continue to accommodate commercial uses and contributing to the heritage character of Ontario Street. The tower is set back from the street to ensure that the Masonic Temple remains prominent in the streetscape. Shadowing studies have been conducted to assess the possible impacts. This one thing to note is that this property is very close to the 8th Street Heritage Conservation District. It's not immediately adjacent because there is a right-of-way that separates them, but it is very close. And so the shadow impacts have been studied and were determined to be minimal on the actual heritage district because of the location of the tower. The HIA does recommend further exploration of transition strategies as the design process continues. And then the HIA also recommends structural monitoring to be conducted throughout the construction to ensure the stability of the building and to possibly and the ongoing preservation of the building. So even though it's very close, or even though it is integrated into this new building, there is the intent to include that construction monitoring so that the building is protected. Just from a heritage planning perspective, the proposal overall balances out the adaptive reuse of the heritage resources with the intensification and housing development kind of goals of the downtown. The integration of the Masonic Temple building with the proposed tower demonstrates a sensitivity to the heritage character of the area while still allowing for that growth. And the HA that was completed does make recommendations for refinement of transition strategies and construction monitoring. And from a heritage perspective, we're very confident that that building will be retained, and then we can go forward and take our time and do that heritage evaluation. Yeah, so that's the overall what's being proposed for the site. I just want to put this up here. This is just the landscape plan. You can kind of see the existing building to be retained and then how it interacts here with the 2-story kind of the parking structure and then the tower here as well. Yeah.
Was there any discussion about, I keep going back to all this stuff, archaeology on the site, because the parking lot area to the right of it was, and in behind was where the Grand Opera House was. So is there so there could be some buried remnants of that opera house.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I can look deeper into the report to see if any recommendations around archaeology have been made, and also to see if that work has been required, because that's very interesting. Yeah.
As the developer of the project, I can speak to that and tell you that we were not asked to do that in our initial reports for rezoning. That was not something that came up to us as a recommendation.
Right.
At pre-con.
Yeah, because the hole in the wall was when it was still standing was basically like the twin of the existing building, and it was the entrance to the Grand Opera House, and then the Grand Opera House was in the lot behind it, destroyed by fire. So when it was demolished, I don't know how much was kind of pushed in and buried, but there could be some darn fine archaeology down there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Do we have other questions for Lauren? Robert.
Yes, through the chair, does this building or the new proposed building actually abut Trafalgar, or is there a buffer between Trafalgar and the new building?
I can respond to that. There is going to be a walkway between the new building and Trafalgar. It's about 4 meters, 4.5 meters, so there will be a bit of a buffer.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? No. Okay, then I guess we need a motion to receive the information about the, oh, Holly?
Just had a quick question, just with construction and when you're building a building of that height and you're going to have to pound piles into the ground, and there'd be lots of pounding and piles. What's going to happen to the Masonic temple? How are you going to protect that? Do you have a plan?
Sure, I can. Oh, Jill, I had a comment and then Jill, I'll pass it over to you. I was just gonna state that we're at a very early stage in the process. We're only at the rezoning stage, not yet at the site plan application stage. And when we're at the site plan application stage, we're gonna have to look more closely at construction management, doing a construction management plan, and figuring out all those details at that point. And I'll pass it over to Jill, the developer, as I believe, Jill, you wanted to say something before I interrupted.
No, you answered it perfectly, so we're good on that. Thank you, though.
So if we've got no other questions or comments, then I guess we need a motion to receive. Robert, are you making the motion? Okay. So all in favor of receiving the report? Okay. I guess that's done. And then moving on to item 8.4, the Port Dalhousie Conservancy trolley shed plaque. And Hank, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an interesting afternoon watching sausage being made. But anyway, this is something a little bit different. I'm assuming that you have the picture of the plaque that's on the thing on the trolley shed at this point, and you also have I think the copy of the Port Reporter, I think page 5, where what our intentions are, where our intentions are sort of outlined. As all of you know, the Conservancy is very much focused on the Port Dalhousie Heritage District and trying to preserve the heritage there. And we've launched a plaque program in the Heritage District in preparation for our 200th anniversary, which is coming up in 2026. And I guess we're convinced that buildings that are marked publicly stand a better chance of preservation, given that the community will take more pride in their heritage and their community. These plaques do not create any legal obligation, but it does have a psychological impact on those who have it. And I'm hoping that homeowners will take some pride in it. And secondly, it's also an educational element for the community and for visitors. For example, what we're working on right now is a quick source of information for visitors, and we hope to draw attention to our heritage buildings. And you'd be surprised at how little people actually know about how old some of these buildings actually are. We already have a number of homeowners that are interested and would like we would like certainly like your endorsement for this program. But in addition to that, we would like the city to allow us to post them in an appropriate location on city-owned heritage buildings. And I'm thinking, in this case, particularly things like the loft tent or shanty. I can tell you that I already have one for the shanty. What I'm following is the Port Dalhousie Heritage Resource Inventory that was created in 1998. We're starting with those homeowners who have homes that are predate 1900. So there is the odd plaque around. There's one on the jail and there's one on the library. They're all quite different. There's a few old ones that you can hardly read anymore. But these plaques here are a relatively quick and inexpensive way. They're easy to install, and they would add, I think, considerable visibility to the Heritage District. And we would certainly like your support for that if we can get it. I think particularly for the heritage buildings that the city actually owns, because obviously as the owner, we need the city's permission to mount them. So that's essentially it. We're hoping that to have most of this done before the 200th anniversary. We are working on a kind of a walking tour of Port Dalhousie that can be handed out. And yeah, we're just hoping to draw visitors' attention to the various heritage aspects of Port Dalhousie.
Who's manufacturing these plaques?
It's a place in Michigan, actually.
Okay.
They're cast aluminum and they're painted, and you can have 26 letters at the top, and we're following the Heritage Resource Inventory in terms of there are certain homes that would have like a familial connection. Let's say the Alexander Muir House, for example, or Dalhousie Hall on Main Street, or but others might just say originally constructed and then give the year, and underneath it says historic Port Dalhousie. They all look exactly the same, so if it would sort of add some consistency throughout the region.
Right. And what do they cost per piece?
We're charging $250, installation included.
Okay. Lorraine, you had a question?
So Hank, are you monitoring what goes on each of the plaques to make sure it's accurate?
Well, we're following the Heritage Resource Inventory, and we're sitting down with the owner and getting like a sign off on each one. So they may be somewhat different because some have, like I said, a strong connection to, like some buildings used to be part of the St. John's Rectory, and they've been broken up into 3 different locations. So yeah, we're trying to get agreement with each person.
I guess that's why I was asking, is because you're following the heritage registry that you have, but
Right.
some people might want a slight difference in how the wording goes, or there might be something that maybe wasn't in that heritage document. So that's why I wondered if there was like a process where they would all go through you for okay and then ordered through you. Is that how it's happening?
Yeah, that's how it's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Hank? Are you asking us to endorse this project now? Because the motion that I understood was that we were just going to receive the information that we're getting from you.
Yeah, well, I simply asked James to ensure that I had an opportunity to address you on the issue. I think that in terms of what we're doing, I guess what we're saying is that we're doing this to the private homeowners and private buildings, but particularly I think the city owned, like the lock tender shanty, which we've already had one made. I'm using it for a sample, but also the something like that on the inner range lighthouse, which has nothing on it to say anything, and the outer range lighthouse. Those are ones that people walk by all the time, and it's just interesting because I've seen people go by the lock tender shanty, for example, and if you don't know any different, you don't know whether it was built in 1887, which is what the resource inventory says, or it was built in 1930. There's no connection, and some people don't even know what it is. So this is just a way of identifying and celebrating the history of Port Dalhousie and in the Heritage District.
I wonder if this is something that we should come back and revisit it at a future meeting, like to formally endorse the project. But for now, just have a motion to receive.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I would like to perhaps at your next meeting, you can think about particularly the public buildings. Yeah, we should do something for them, because I think that right now people just don't know, and it's a quick way of identifying something. And when people are walking around the Heritage District, they can remark on hey, wow, that building is almost 200 years old. Just a good way of keeping people in Port Dalhousie and visitors to Port Dalhousie focused on heritage.
Right. No, it sounds like a good project. I think if we have you back for a future meeting, that would be great. But I think for now we should just make a motion to receive the information that we've got from you.
Okay.
Robert, question, motion?
Yes, I had a question. Forgive me if I'm off track here, but is the plan for the city-owned buildings to be these plaques to be paid for by the city and through the Heritage Advisory Committee or the plaquing committee? Or what's the thoughts there?
Well, I mean, given the fact that they're relatively inexpensive, it would be nice if the Heritage Committee would do that, yes. Because we're asking the homeowners to pay for their own home. So, yeah, as an owner, I think the city, it's a relatively inexpensive thing to have happen, and you don't have to do anything for it, because we'll take care of the installation, and we'll sign an agreement for each one in terms of location and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And I wasn't quite sure whether that expenditure would come through I am on the plaquing subcommittee, and just to our people, would that come out of our budget? The plaquing subcommittee budget. And that's not for you, Hank, actually, that's for my committee.
Yeah. So which Lorraine or Lauren?
Okay, well, just let me. I'm going to say
Lorraine first.
Weigh in if that's okay. That
Yeah,
sets a real precedent, though, Robert. Because what if for some other areas that want to do something similar, we wouldn't.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that.
No, I know. But just in case.
Just in case. I don't want to be surprised.
No, and you know what? And it could involve a lot more money than we have for plaquing.
Absolutely.
I'm on the plaquing committee with you. That's why I'm pulling you back. No. I'm kidding.
So
Very good. Okay, well, the
Okay,
question
Lauren.
can't be answered just yet, so
Yeah,
that's fine.
through the chair, we can look at that. I do know that right now our plaque budget for 2024 and 2025 has already been assigned to the two plaques that we're working on. So I don't know if like timeline wise, if that works. But it could be the kind of project that, you know, could come to the plaque committee, or to look at those kind of things. It's just like currently right now, 2024 and 2025, the budget has already been you know, allocated to the plaques that we've been working on, and also to the Famine Way Shoes project that Adrian brought to us previously. But I do think that what we can do is we could take this item and the minutes and the feedback and comments that people have given, and we can forward them to facilities, and we can kind of start that discussion around the city-owned structures, and I think that would be useful, just to kind of take this information and connect it with the people who have responsibility for those structures, and I think that would be really useful. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
this one you already have, so.
Nice.
Holly?
It's beautiful.
I just want to say, I love this idea, Hank, and however we can work together to support this, because when you go to different cities and you go through the heritage districts and see plaques, it's so interesting to know when that house was, you know, what is the year of that home. Niagara on the Lake too, a lot of homes on even Queen Street, they've got the navy blue plaques, and it'll stay, you know, established 18 whatever and 1885, and it's just, to me, I really like the idea.
Dr. Bergen?
Yes, Hank just last night talked me into getting one for my house, which, as he said, residences are paying for their own, so that part is taken care of.
It
And
makes me
they're
think
not
of,
crazy expensive.
makes me think of the blue plaques that they have all over London, England, you know, on heritage buildings. Andrew?
Well, I'd asked for one for my house, but I don't think 2014 is quite early enough yet. I'm patient though. That's fine. I want to echo what Holly said. I think this is a great initiative, and my perspective is that awareness and more so engagement are more important to ensuring that our property is protected even than designation. So spreading the word and engaging people with the properties around them is essential. And the fact that this was initiated by a grassroots community organization is a huge plus to see people stepping up and taking an interest in their neighborhood, in their city is a great thing that should be endorsed and supported and encouraged.
Right.
So thank you, Hank, to you and the group.
Okay. So, can we have a motion to receive?
I'd like to make that motion.
Robert, thank you. And all in favor? Okay. We have no subcommittee updates. The one thing that I did want to really quickly add, and Dr. Bergen, you will remember this, when David Webb used to always say that there might be houses in Port Dalhousie that have log cabins lurking underneath them. So I was talking to Corleen Taylor just yesterday, and she was going through her great grandfather's papers or something, and she found a notation about a house in Port Dalhousie, which I think is number 5 Ann Street. We've dealt with, I think, permits for number 5 Ann previously, and she said that the notation that was in her family papers was that the house that was there was originally built by George Edwin Reed and his wife sometime around 1829. It was originally stood back of the barn at the rear of the property overlooking Martindale Pond. It was sold to the Plumsteel family, and it was moved to Ann and Pine Street, where it now forms part of the George Houston House, or Houston House. And of course, the Houstons, the plum steels, they were all on that. When I did the title search for that property, it turns out that, yes, that's right, they were there. So it looks as if that house actually might have a log cabin lurking underneath it, which I thought was really, really cool. And that's all that I wanted to say about number 5 Ann Street. So I guess the date of our next meeting is going to be January 16th, 2025. And I guess at this point we would need to have a motion to adjourn. My clock says that it's 5:38. So does somebody wish to make that motion? Holly, thank you. And all in favor? Okay, so thanks everybody. Sorry about the length of the meeting. And I hope everybody has a great Christmas and a great New Year, and we'll see you back in 2025.
Thank you, everyone.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thanks. Yeah.
Merry
Happy
Christmas.
holidays. Merry Christmas.
Christmas and happy heritage.
Exactly.